Welcome in to 2-Point Drafts. Austin Gayle here, as always, with my guy, Mike Renner. Have a loaded podcast on the books here today. We're going to talk about some standout rookies in training camp per training camp videos, which no one can get enough of right now, but also beat reporters saying you have certain players running with the ones, getting a lot of usage early in camp. I flock to that news, so I want to bring up some rookies: Henry Ruggs, Bryan Edwards, CeeDee Lamb, Cameron Dantzler with a handful of highlight plays, and we're also going to interview Dane Brugler of The Athletic, talk about his top 50, a friend of the podcast, guy who is an elite mind in the space, one of my favorites to read every year about each draft class. And then we're also going to do biggest takeaways from PFF's preseason 2021 NFL draft guide, which we are giving away to those that rate and review the podcast. If you rate and review the podcast and leave your email with a space between the @ symbol, we're going to send out 10 draft guides. You'll have a chance to win one of those. I'm excited for this pod, Mike. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I'm still laughing about you saying an elite mind in this space.
Elite mind in this space is a bit weird.
Crazy. I'm going to have to bring that up to Dane in the interview.
Do you think he's an elite mind in this space?
I do, but the thing about Dane that I love is he puts in more work than anyone else. Mm-hmm. Quite obviously.
Way more than you.
Yeah, fuck, that's not hard. But no, he really does, and you can tell like he knows these guys inside and out. You could tell when a guy's bullshitting you, talking about a prospect, and that's never Dane. So I respect the hell out of what he does.
I mean, I respect him to the point where I said he's an elite mind in the space. So, but before we bring Dane on, let's go ahead and talk these rookies. First two I want to bring up, actually, Dallas Cowboys. See some beat reporters saying it shouldn't surprise you, but CeeDee Lamb and Trevon Diggs are easily the two best rookies at camp, which sometimes other teams aren't having that. You know, there's some first rounders that aren't living up to expectation while UDFAs and day 3 picks are actually shining bright. How much of an impact do you think CeeDee Lamb and Trevon Diggs have on this Dallas Cowboys team that is in a position to be competitive, that's in a position to potentially make a deep playoff run with Dak Prescott under center?
Yeah, I mean, we called it at the time of the draft. We said there was an absolute coup for them to get those two where they did. 17th overall for CeeDee Lamb was absurd. This guy was top 10 talent in the draft. And then Trevon Diggs we saw as a borderline first-round talent to get him in the middle of the second round at a position that massive need for them after losing Byron Jones. Called it then, and to me, it's no surprise that CeeDee Lamb, you knew, was going to hit the ground running. That guy, he had it already. Trevon Diggs, there were concerns like on his tape, like he got just manhandled by Jamar Chase. What is he going to do against more physical NFL wide receivers? But he has an NFL skill. Like him getting manhandled by Jamar Chase, I think was like a wake-up call for him in terms of he's physical enough that should not be happening, and that I think you're not going to see that at the NFL level. And he was 1 year removed from a serious injury. And I think that oftentimes you'll make that excuse for guys in the NFL. I feel like we rarely make that excuse for prospects to where it's like, oh, this is his first year back from an injury. It's the next year where he's going to turn it on. A lot of times we don't like say that about a prospect that he missed all the season before. And I think you're seeing some of that with Trevon Diggs.
I am super excited, obviously for Trevon Diggs, but also CeeDee Lamb in this receiving core. When Amari Cooper is getting a ton of attention, when Michael Gallup is working off what was a career year, I think CeeDee Lamb, he's not going to be a forgotten piece in this offense, but likely working a ton from the slot. And Amari Cooper will get in there as well. But I think there's going to be a chance that CeeDee Lamb is going against bad cornerbacks in the NFL and dominating because he was one of the more polished prospects coming out.
I'll say this is how you want to build a receiving core, is 3 guys that there's not one that's a slot receiver. There's not one that's an outside receiver. There's not one that has to be pigeonholed into X role. Mm-hmm. They can go wherever they want at any given time. They're all versatile body types that can win in a number of different ways. That's scary. But it's basically pick your poison. You play man coverage against them. Dak Prescott's like, where's my weak link? Where's my weakest corner? Attack that guy. And I think that's kind of what Mike McCarthy had early 2011 Packers when they had Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, Donald Driver, James Jones, where it's just all 4 of those guys go pretty much anywhere and win. I think you're going to see a monster year from this Cowboys offense.
Another receiver I want to bring up, a rookie that's standing out in training camp and now has a ton of opportunity with Tyrell Williams battling what was a torn labrum and surgery there, is Bryan Edwards, a guy that you wrote a piece on for PFF.com saying temper expectations for Bryan Edwards coming out of South Carolina. We were not super high on Bryan Edwards coming out. Danny Kelly liked him. There's a ton of people in the draft space, specifically the fantasy community, that really did like Bryan Edwards. He had a good dominator rating, a good breakout age. But what are your reservations with Bryan Edwards? Because if I'm reading the timeline, this guy looks like the second coming of Jesus Christ. So it's hard to see, it's hard to see through all that positivity why there might be some reservations.
To be fair, he's going up against the Raiders corners. That's obviously going to make you look better. I mean, like to some degree that does. But my reservations about him coming out were getting off the line of scrimmage consistently. He had one hesitation move, and it wasn't that special of a move. Now he wins with physicality more, is his game. To me, I think he can be a solid, above average possession type receiver, but it was just winning down the football field. Any route breaking more than 12 yards down the field was just unimpressive, in my opinion. That's why I just didn't think, and that's where, again, we value the guys who can do it after the catch, who are dynamic in that regard, and the guys who can do it down the football field, the possession stuff, that sort of thing, not nearly as high on those guys. But I think if that's the role he's playing in that offense, I wouldn't be surprised if he looks good in that side.
I'm convinced that he'll have a handful of star contested catches on tape this year. I'm not convinced that he won't have a ton of targets with Derek Carr. However, winning the valuable routes, separating on the valuable routes downfield against elite cornerbacks in the NFL, fast, athletic cornerbacks in the NFL, I'm not buying it. I don't see him being a good separator downfield in the NFL. And if you can't do that, I'm not going to buy into you being a good, wide receiver one type.
It's funny, Henry Ruggs and Bryan Edwards both looking good in camp. Derek Carr is going to give
Darren Waller
over 100 targets, and he's going to give
Hunter
Renfrow over 100 targets also, just because that's Derek Carr.
They're going to be running a more shallow route tree. Two running backs I wanted to bring up: Cam Akers for the Los Angeles Rams and Antonio Gibson for the Washington Football Team, both running with the ones right now. We liked both of these guys. You highlighted Cam Akers as a guy that will outplay his draft position. Antonio Gibson, who ran with the wide receivers and ran a 4.39, and everyone forgets about it, but it's up there with Jonathan Taylor in terms of athleticism. I think, again, hitting on skill players, so you might as well talk about the fantasy aspect. If these guys get touches, I think they can be more efficient than maybe they were at the collegiate level. Well, not Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson was one of the most efficient running backs or skill players in college football playing at Memphis. His missed tackle rate is absurd. I think both of these guys, though, I'm excited to see what they do in year one.
Gibson and Akers were probably in the draft the two most dynamic running backs with the ball in their hands. Like, they were the most difficult running backs to tackle if you're one-on-one with them in space, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So I'm not surprised that they're looking good right away. That is a skill that we've said again and again translates to the NFL. If you can break tackles at a high level in college, chances are you're going to do it in the NFL also. And Akers, to me, he's a better running back prospect than Darrell Henderson was coming out, for sure. The biggest thing with him was just vision, and it was difficult to evaluate with him behind that awful Florida State offensive line. Now, he might not be getting much better blocking with the Rams this year with what they got in the interior, but him looking like the running back one there is not surprising.
All right, two more offensive players I want to bring up before we dive on defense here. It's KJ Hamler, who ran a pretty sweet blaze out before getting injured in camp. And then Jerry Jeudy hasn't had a flashy highlight hit my timeline yet, but I consistently hear one of the better receivers in camp. And I think both those guys, as much as we are tempering expectations for Drew Lock compared to the Denver Broncos stands, I still think there is so much weaponry there in Denver that Hamler and Jeudy could have legitimate volume, legitimate targets, and see success on those targets in 2020.
Yeah, Jeudy, this should surprise no one. The way that guy ran routes in college was probably the most advanced I've seen, I don't know, since Mark Cooper, and like probably more than that. Mark Cooper's just bigger. Mm-hmm. The dude has a different way of getting open than anyone, like I said, anyone I've ever seen. It just moves in a ridiculous way, the way he just can contort his lower body and sink his hips throughout his routes. So that should come as no surprise. I wouldn't be surprised if he, outproduces Courtland Sutton year one. Like, he's just that good.
Wow. That's a hot take.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I thought Denver, the Denver fans like Jeudy and Hamler, they love Courtland Sutton. Oh, yeah. Don't throw any slander on that guy.
It's not slander on Sutton. That's just Judy's that good.
If Jeudy outperforms Sutton,
like, I think he could be Odell Beckham year one. Odell Beckham was over 100 yards a game as a rookie, and even though he played like 12 games or was close to that, Jerry Jeudy, I think, was just as talented.
High praise. All right, let's bring up Cameron Dantzler, Minnesota Vikings. Justin Jefferson apparently is running with the twos more often than he is running with ones, but Dantzler, on the other hand, is taking advantage of opportunity in Minnesota camp, standing out quite a bit. We always said the tape was good. The tape was good. Then you had he ran like a 4.2 40 on his friend's phone, but like a 4.6 40 at the scouting combine. There were concerns with
like a 4.5 if you just actually timed it for real.
There were concerns with his arm length, concerns with his weight, and then concerns with his athleticism. But when you actually turn on the tape, you see him do it against Jamar Chase. You see him do it against some of the top receivers in the SEC. And I think playing in Mike Zimmer's scheme, he'll have more opportunities for success than some of these other corners. I think Dantzler will be a guy that shows up big for Minnesota.
Yeah, it was a good scheme fit, and he's already
Him and Gladney were both good scheme fits. Yeah. Zimmer knows what he's doing over there.
And he's already listed at 188, which...
Beef season.
Up. Yeah, he was what? He looked like 175 on his college tape. So I think he wasn't just a combine overthink to an egregious degree to go all the way to the third round. This guy his tape was borderline first round. Obviously, you'd rather draft a guy who doesn't run a 4.6 in the first round, but I do think a lot of that was form based. It was one of the
start.
Ugliest.
The start was
one of the ugliest 40s I saw all spring. So I will say I think he's going to be good. I have a piece coming out this week about the top 10 bold predictions for the rookie class. Cameron Dantzler, I think, is going to be with top 3 graded cornerbacks. I wrote that in the piece. So.
Oh, wow. There we go.
Top 3 graded rookie cornerbacks.
Last thing here before we jump to the Dane Brugler interview, we have Grant Delpit, pour one out segment. We haven't done a pour one out segment in a while. That's a segment near and dear to 2-for-1 drafts where we pour one out for someone who just hasn't performed well, suffered a big injury, whatever it may happen. Grant Delpit going to miss this upcoming season due to an injury. That is super unfortunate. I thought he had a real chance to be really good for the Browns. I thought the Browns draft was very good. This hurts.
Yeah, that he was supposed to, he was starting. He was running with the ones. I thought he was one of the steals of the draft in the second round. A torn Achilles to start your career, though, is really putting you behind the 8 ball because it's no easy injury to come back for a guy that has to cover ground like a safety does. So that's unfortunate.
I don't even know what you do. What do you work on as a rookie with a torn Achilles? Oh, man. Behind the 8 ball is an understatement, in my opinion.
I will say, Andrew Berry then, the coup, grabbing Curtis Weaver off of waivers.
Before the Dolphins can put him on the injured reserve.
Dolphins was a play. I can't believe the Dolphins would be so callous. They traded up to get him. They traded 2 draft picks to go get him and then just flush it down the drain. After 1 week at camp, that seems a little... They're playing with fire there, and I think they got burnt.
With Curtis Weaver, too, I think didn't have a great body. I think there were probably reasons don't love his weight at this right now. He's got the injury, reason to kind of waive and put him on the injured reserve. But I want to go back to Andrew Berry's draft a little bit because it was a PFF-heavy draft. Jedrick Wills was a guy we really liked at 10. Grant Delpit was one of what we thought was a steal in round 2. Then they grabbed Jordan Elliott, the highest-graded interior defensive lineman in college football that past year. And then after that, Nick Harris was a guy that graded well at Washington. But then picking up Curtis Weaver now, another PFF favorite, a guy we valued more than the consensus. I'm impressed with Andrew Berry diving into the analytics and seeing that these numbers matter.
I'm saying I think people were just a year early on the Browns. I think they're going to be good this year.
A year early on the Browns. All right, with that, let's go ahead and pivot and bring on Dane to 2-for-1 drafts. Joining the 2-for-1 Drafts podcast is none other than Dane Brugler of The Athletic, a guy that we love having on the pod. Before we brought you on, I have to bring this up before Mike buries me for it. I said you are an elite mind in the space, which sounds weird as hell, and I regret phrasing it that way, but I do think you are one of the better, if not the best draft analyst, better than this guy across from me. And I always encourage everyone to read your stuff, and I read your stuff all the time. So it's really an honor to have you on the pod.
Well, I appreciate that. And just another example how we overuse the word elite in the draft process. But no, I do appreciate that.
Elite mind in the space. I'm going to keep that one near and dear. Might have to put that in your Twitter bio, Dane. Let's go ahead and kick this off. You recently dropped on The Athletic, which I say this every time we talk to someone from The Athletic. Go subscribe to The Athletic. They employ some of the best writers, some of the most elite minds in the space that there is in sports, including baseball, basketball, across the board. So subscribe to The Athletic to read Dane Brugler's latest top 50. Talk to me about what this, how did you value not knowing what this season's going to look like with these players? Because that's tough. There's guys that, like Jason Owe, like Kwity Paye, Aiden Hutchinson, Chris Olave, guys that aren't going to have tape, likely won't have tape before the draft. How much did that weigh into putting this top 50 together, knowing that you're not going to maybe see Shaun Wade play again, knowing that you're not going to see some of these guys that have a lot to prove play again? I'm interested in how that affected your approach to this top 50.
Yeah, and it's tough because obviously this is unprecedented, a situation like this. And, in the past we've seen where a player will miss his final year, whether it's a Nick Bosa or, even going back to Sam Bradford, and, you just have to figure it out. But to have entire conferences not being able to play, and this is a really strong year for the Big Ten in terms of prospects. And in my top 50, I actually had 15 Big Ten players, which is one more than the SEC had. So it is a really strong group of players. Penn State's well represented, Ohio State, obviously. I think Michigan had 3 players. But a lot of these guys are still somewhat unproven. You brought up Sean Wade, who's, he's really tough because we saw what he did last year as an inside receiver. And I actually think he's going to be better outside because he's not a sudden athlete, but he's a good athlete. He's very physical. I think he has ball skills. And I think outside's probably his best cornerback position at the next level. But we just don't have much of a sample size to evaluate him as an outside corner. So that makes it a really tough evaluation. Now, how does that work out in terms of value on draft day? And when you do an exercise like this, how do you figure out where to put him? It makes it tough. Rondale Moore, another guy who had maybe the best freshman season we've ever seen at the receiver position, and then plays 4 games last year, which he was basically hurt. And then obviously not going to play this year. So another example of, okay, well, what do you do with a player like this who's 5'9", 180, but just a sick athlete? And, is he a slot only guy? Can he win consistently down the field? We're left with a lot of questions. And so I think that will be the common theme of this draft process is we're going to be left with probably more questions than answers with several of these players. And it's just up to us individually as evaluators to try to connect the dots, even though we don't have all the information and all the information to connect those dots. So it's going to be tougher, but I think it's going to make it really interesting.
So I'm of the opinion that the Big Ten, some of these teams will find a way to play football this fall. Like the Ohio State's the world, Michigan, they'll find a way to play some games despite the Big Ten not wanting to. Do you think, this two-pronged question, I guess, do you think that's a possibility? Do you agree with my take there? And do you think that if there's not Big Ten football, Pac-12 football, a lot of these conferences cancel, that the NFL will find their own way to get more tape on these guys in terms of maybe a longer combine, longer Senior Bowl, or something like that?
Yeah, well, I love that you're thinking about that because I'm hoping we see some of these players on the field again. And, it's just not, okay, throw in the towel, that's it. I've talking to people, my different contacts at these different programs, a lot of them haven't given up. A lot of them haven't said, okay, well, let's turn the page and, look, that's it. They're not giving up because they know how much this means to a lot of these players. I would be surprised if we see, Ohio State play, Penn State play, just because I don't think the Big Ten would allow it, and there's too much money on the line. I mean, each one of these programs gets like over $50 million from the Big Ten based off the TV contracts. So if they play going against the Big Ten, their rulings, then, I think there's going to be a breach of contract there and money's involved. And obviously Ohio State can do whatever they want. They are the king of that conference, and they don't necessarily need the Big Ten to tell them what to do because the Big Ten can, do what they want, or the Ohio State can do what they want. But I would still be surprised if we see them. Now, the second part of that's where I think things could really get interesting if we have fall pro days or some type of 7-on-7 type of situation where we still get to see these guys in a football environment. It's not necessarily just workouts where, agility testing and things like that. We get to see them actually on the football field and doing football similar things. The Senior Bowl traditionally has only been for seniors and for select redshirt juniors. And so will the NFL be more open to involving underclassmen this year? There's just so much on the table right now, a lot to figure out. Will a spring season happen? I don't think it'll happen. I think there's just too much going on, but a lot of these coaches think that it will. So, and then how will the NFL react to that? Will they push back the NFL draft calendar at all? Will they move the Senior Bowl back a little bit? Will they move the combine, whatever the combine is going to look like this year? I don't think anybody knows. Will they move that back a little bit? So the NFL draft calendar itself is going to be really interesting. But I'm with you. Hopefully we see these guys. I don't know if we'll see Micah Parsons on the field. He seems dead set on opting out of anything. But hopefully we get a chance to see him. I'd love to see Justin Fields on the field again, and I think we need it as part of his evaluation. He looked great last year, first year in the program, running Ryan Day's offense. But I came away when I watched Justin Fields tape, I was more impressed with Ryan Day than I was Justin Fields, and that's not a knock.
That offense is insane.
It's remarkable, and I think it speaks more to Ryan Day than anything. But I still want to see more from Justin Fields at the college level, and hopefully we get that opportunity.
Two things there. One, an analyst with PFF here, Seth Galina, talked about just how that offense puts Justin Fields in such a position to succeed. And yes, he takes advantage of those opportunities Ryan Day is presenting him. But again, that offense is just truly incredible too. I would die for some 7-on-7 between the Pac-12 and Big Ten, or some one-on-one pass rush opportunities on ESPN or wherever it may be in the fall, because I think that would be huge. Seeing some of those reps for these players would be big. I wanted to bring up a specific player on your top 50. You have Patrick Surtain, the Alabama cornerback, 6'2", 205 at number three on your top 50 board. And I think I see a lot, and this isn't just helmet scouting, but I do see a lot of similarities between Surtain and Trevon Diggs. So I'd love for you to, one, talk about your infatuation with Surtain and what he can do at the next level, and two, compare him to Trevon Diggs, who went in the second round to the Dallas Cowboys this past year.
Well, with Surtain, I think if you're going to draw up a corner, I think he has a lot of what you're looking for. He has length, he has speed. I mean, he's not a 4.30 guy, but he's going to run in the 4.4s. He's very instinctive. I think you can throw on the tape and see him play man. You can see him play zone. You can see him play press. You can see him play off. You can see him play inside. You can see him play outside. He's done it all. Former 5-star guy, obviously the son of a former All-Pro NFL corner. Who also coached him at American Heritage. So he's been groomed for this for a long time. He's a 5-star recruit, goes to Alabama, and he starts right away as a true freshman. So I think that he's been groomed for this for a long time, and you see him get better and better with each game. You throw in the LSU tape from last year, Jamar Chase had a pretty good game, but when he went up against Surtain, he did not find as much success as he did against Diggs. And Diggs, a really toolsy player with his speed, his size, former receiver, so he had the ball skills. But I didn't think he was on Surtain's level with his technique, with his instincts. And so I think that if Surtain was in last year's draft, I think there would have been a really good discussion. Who's the cornerback number one in last year's class? Is it Jeff Okudah or is it Surtain? And I think that would have been an interesting debate. That would have, I think it would have been split across the league. I'm really high on this player, and he's my top defensive player on my top 50, just ahead of Micah Parsons and a few other guys. But I think he's the real deal.
So, Dane, I think it's clear that you have a type when it comes to the secondary, and it's not small guys. You're basically that girl on Tinder who says 6 foot or up or don't message me. You're that.
I ran into a few of those, actually.
But because two of my favorite defensive backs in this class, Memphis' T.J. Carter, the cornerback from Memphis, TCU's safety, Ardarius Washington, they did not make your cornerback and safety top 10s respectively. Tell me what your thoughts about how much length does matter in terms of cornerback and safety play, and I guess it's your thoughts on Carter and Washington there.
Yeah, and I think in the secondary, length is big. There's no question for me. And you look at my top 3 ranked corners this year. Surtain's over 6 foot. Caleb Farley, who I know you guys like as well, he's 6'1", 6'2". Sean Wade, he's pushing 6'1". Darian Kendrick from Clemson, he's over 6 foot. And so I really do prefer length at the position. And, I don't know. When you talk about the safety position, I think that's where maybe you can give a little bit more. I mean, we just saw Budda Baker this week get one of the richest contracts in NFL history for a defensive back. And the big question with him coming out of that draft class was size. We knew he could fly around the field, but how much was the size going to play a factor in what kind of pro he was going to be? So with Ardarius Washington, you're talking about a guy that is undersized. He's going to be 5'8.5", maybe 5'9". I don't think he's has the same physical profile as his safety teammate Morig. But you look at the production last year, you look at what he was able to do, and you see a quality player. So he is going to be a difficult evaluation, and I'm hopefully we get to see a full season from him this year. As of now, TCU plans on playing that full season. And with Carter, another guy that is 5'9". I saw a guy that's probably going to run in the 4.5s. I didn't see a speedster, and the lack of length, and right there. I mean, that is working against him, and so he better be well above average with the ball skills, with his ability to pattern match from press, his ability to play inside outside, and I do like him, but not as much as you guys have him rated. And it just comes down to the size, the physical profile, and not being able to just get all the way there because of some of the physical limitations that I've seen.
Yeah, Carter is not a toolsy, traits-focused player, that's for damn sure. I'm going back to Bama with you here, Dane, and I want to talk about Jalen Waddle, who you have ranked highly on your top 50, and a guy that Mike and I, when we were in the summer, watching for our top 50, was a guy that popped off the tape, a guy that we immediately said, is this guy better than Henry Ruggs? I think he has better twitch, quick twitch muscles. He moves better. He's more jittery than Henry Ruggs, and that will allow for him in a higher volume role, I think, outproduce what Henry Ruggs did at Alabama. Again, compare these prospects for me. Your opinion on Waddle and the differences, the difference between him and Ruggs. Is he potentially a better prospect than the number 10 overall pick in 2020?
Well, and I think there'll be an interesting conversation throughout the process. Who's wide receiver 2? I think most people would agree Jamar Chase from LSU. He's going to be the first receiver off the board. But then there's a kind of a mix of some talented receivers duking it out for that number 2 spot. Could it be, Rashad Bateman from Minnesota, who's obviously a different type of receiver? Rondale Moore, Devontae Smith. I mean, this is another really good receiver class. Jalen Waddle would be my guess. You asked me right now in August, 8 months before the draft, who's going to be that number 2 receiver. My guess would be Jalen Waddle because of some of those things that you mentioned. He's just a special athlete, a very natural catch and go guy. And that's what we saw with Henry Ruggs, who wasn't the most polished receiver, but he's so special as an athlete that the Raiders were going to take a chance on him that high. And so with Jalen Waddle, you have some similar things, and he's probably been a better performer on special teams than offense to this point. And I think part of that is because there were so many mouths to feed in that Alabama offense with Judy and Ruggs and Smith. But now with Judy and Ruggs in the NFL, Waddle's going to have a chance to step up and be more of an impact guy on offense. And so want to see him just be a more detailed route runner, adds a little more nuance to what he does in terms of setting up defensive backs, creating his own space. We know what he can do with the ball in his hands. 3 special teams touchdowns over his career. He averaged something crazy like 24 yards per punt return last year, which is just ridiculous. He was an SEC Special Teams Player of the Year. So short area burst, the top end speed, a very, very gifted athlete. What can he do on offense in terms of developing and becoming a more well-rounded receiver? That's what I want to see from him this year. But if you had to tell me to guess right now who's going to be that second receiver off the board, I think Waddle would be my guess.
I kind of want to ask the same question about the edge class. I think everyone pretty much has Greg Rousseau penciled in as the number 1 edge. But the 2 guys after him for a lot of people, Jason Owe, Kwity Paye, looks like they're not going to be playing this fall. Where do they end up going, and who ends up being edge 2?
Yeah, great question. I think a couple of really good players who it's just a shame we won't be able to see them this year. And I think 2 players that they're one's obviously older. Paye's a senior, where Owe is an underclassman, and so we've seen more of Paye. But still, we wanted to see more of him. Only 6.5 sacks last year. Obviously, I think he's a much better player than just that number. We see a twitched up athlete, a guy that can put pressure on the pocket. You throw up that Iowa tape, and you see a first round player when you watch Kwity Paye. But still, a guy that's still growing into his body, figuring out the position. He was number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freak list. And according to that article, he ran a 6.37 3-cone, which is just
what?
What you look at some of the pass rushers in the NFL. Von Miller ran one of the best 3-cone drills ever for a pass rusher at 6.70. So if Paye comes anywhere close to a 6.37, I mean, that just tells you kind of what kind of athlete that he is. He's just got a really interesting backstory. I mean, he grew up in the Liberian Civil War. He was born in Guinea. He immigrated to the U.S. when he was I think 1 year old. And he comes from Rhode Island, which is not a football crazy state. You don't see a lot of recruits coming out of Rhode Island. Former running back who really developed his body, moved to pass rusher. So he's still figuring out how to use his hands and do things. And so I think there's a correlation there with Jason Owe, who another guy, basketball background, didn't start playing football until he transferred schools for basketball reasons as a junior. The football coaches got one look at him and said, hey, you're coming out to the football field. And he kind of hit the ground running and became this big time recruit. This was going to be a big year for him, I think, with a chance to step up as a starter. He had 5 sacks last year coming off the bench, but he had a chance to be a starter this year opposite Shaka Toney, and this is going to be his emergence. But without the season, he's still unproven, and so he came in at number 15 overall on my board, and it's ranked entirely on potential because we just don't have that body of work that you want to see normally from a top 15 player, but he plays the right position. He's an edge rusher, and I think all the tools are there. It's just, can he live up to it? So 15 is pretty rich, and he's going to have an interesting decision to make here because ideally you'd like to see him go back to school and put more of a resume together, but he's so talented that I still think he has a chance to be a first-round pick this year.
2 players I wanted to bring up to you, 2 of my favorites in this class, ranked 33 and 35 on your board. Chris Olave, Ohio State, who I think is the best route runner in this class, and then also Asante Samuel Jr., who undersized in every way. But you, after talking about length, after talking about what you need at the cornerback position to excel, have him at 35 on her board. So you must like what he brings to the table. Talk to me about those 2 prospects, because I think both of those guys, though not top 32 players on your board right now, are fantastic and could very well sneak themselves higher on your list.
Yeah, and I love Olave as well. I mean, I'm a Big Ten guy. I mean, that's where I live. That's where I grew up. There is nothing better in the fall than Big Ten football for me, and that's why it's just been a depressing time here the last few weeks after the Big Ten's decision. But Olave is so much fun. Him and Fields just had that natural connection, and we saw it the year before with Dwayne Haskins when he was a freshman. He took it to another level with Fields last year, and they were due for a really big year this season. That unfortunately won't happen. He's not the most physically impressive guy. He's 6'1", maybe a $190. I don't know what he's going to run. He's not going to be necessarily a blazer. So the physical traits are, by NFL standards, average for the receiver position. But like what you said, he's able to win early because of his releases. His routes are outstanding. And then his hand technique to finish catches is outstanding. He really understands that part of the position very well. It comes natural to him. He doesn't have a lot of drops. Sometimes he'll use his body a little bit more than you want to see, but that's nitpicking because this guy is really impressive with the way he can track the football, focus, and then use that hand technique to finish. So Chris Olave, I'm a big fan. And like I said before, this receiver class is another really impressive group. And Olave's probably going to be, I think right now, talking to scouts around the league, he's in that second and third round conversation. So not really viewed as a first rounder. And without a season, I don't know that he's going to be able to get into that first round. And especially because he's probably not going to necessarily have a combine performance where he's just going to blow up. So I think Chris Olave if he could be had in the second round, I think it'd be tremendous value. And then Asante Samuel, who, just after we had that conversation about length and how important it is, Asante Samuel, he is the opposite. He's more of your 5'10", a $185 corner, a little undersized. But this guy gets his hands on the football. 15 passes defended last year. And I think there is a common theme in this draft with corners and their former All-Pro NFL dads. You talked about Patrick Surtain earlier, Asante Samuel now, J.C. Horn from South Carolina also made my top 50, his dad being Joe Horn. But Asante Samuel, just like his dad, who, they weren't the biggest guys, but their instincts, their anticipation skills, their quickness, be able to click and close, their drive, just really, really impressive. They trust their vision above all. And I think that comes from his tape study. His coaches speak really highly of the way he works, the way he prepares between the week, between games during the week. So he understands what the offense is trying to do, gets a head start, and he trusts what he sees. And so he's able to be very confident, decisive in what he does. And that shows up in the stat sheet, and that shows up with offenses trying to stay away from him. So Asante Samuel, we will see him this year in the ACC. So eager to see what he can do with another year under his belt, coming in as a true junior. I think right now, because of the size, I have him more in the second round range, but we'll see if he can get up even higher.
All right, Dan, one last question before we let you go here. And it's the question that I get every single podcast and every single radio hit that I'm on, and I hate it, but who is this year's Joe Burrow? Or any position. Who's a guy not on the radar right now that you could see having a meteoric rise towards top 10, top 15?
Yeah, I'll answer that a few different ways, because I think that, let's just say, because there's not going to be a Joe Burrow this year. I think we can agree on that. But if there somehow were at the quarterback position, I think there are two names that really stick out. Kyle Trask from Florida. I don't think he's on Joe Burrow's level by any means. But when you look at just his backstory and his journey, being not playing in high school, being stuck as the backup, and then coming in last year as a first-year starter and kind of elevating that Florida offense a little bit. You think, that's kind of like Joe Burrow. He was stuck on the bench at Ohio State, had an average first season at LSU, and then that second year when he got to be on the field, that's where it really took off for him. Well, maybe with Kyle Trask, it'll start to click even more for him. And because he hasn't played a lot of football and he was so impressive when he finally got on the field, maybe that second year at Florida this upcoming season will be kind of that year for him. And he has some talent around him with Kyle Pitts and some of these young wide receivers that he has on that offense. So maybe Kyle Trask. Another quarterback that maybe could do it would be Desmond Ridder at Cincinnati, who I look out for Cincinnati this year. With hopefully the college football season is able to have a full season, and the Big 12, ACC, SEC, they're going to be pushing for those 4 spots in the playoff. If Cincinnati is able to run through the AAC, you're not going to be able to keep them out of the playoffs. And if they are able to do that, it's because they have a really good defense, and it's because Desmond Ridder took that next step as a quarterback. And so I think that could be a situation where maybe he's not elevated to the number 1 pick, but maybe Desmond Ridder makes a case for why he should be one of the first quarterbacks off the board. Maybe that 4th guy after the top 3, talking about Lawrence and Lance and Fields. So I think those 2 quarterbacks stand out. If I was going to go away from the quarterback position and go somewhere else, I think I'd say Jordan Davis, the Georgia defensive tackle, 6'6", 330. Not every class has a Quinnen Williams type of player where he just out of nowhere kind of the light bulb comes on at the right time and he shoots up draft boards throughout the season. Most draft classes don't have that, but maybe Jordan Davis can be that because the traits, the tools, the talent, it's all there. It's just he needs to put it together. He's, like I said, 6'6", 330, but he moves really well. He's strong. He's physical. He can rush the passer. He can stop the run. So I think Jordan Davis maybe could go from, and I put him high. I mean, Kirby Smart, if he had a chance to look at my top 50, I'm sure he hates to see Jordan Davis in there because he's still more potential than production at this point. But all the talent is there. Wouldn't be surprised if we see him maybe move up a little bit throughout the course of this season because he's just so talented.
I'm actually glad you brought up Desmond Ridder. In my first few years here in Cincinnati, I was covering the Bearcats as part of the few things that I did. And a tip on Desmond Ridder, I don't know if you know this. Dude talks trash like more than anyone I've ever seen at the quarterback position. All his teammates talk about how much this guy talks trash, how much he likes to get into his opponent's head. And I know there's some quarterbacks with some edge, but this guy loves to dig into his teammates, dig into the opposing competition. So Desmond Ridder, in addition to having, I think, really good arm talent, and has not been able to really thrive from a box score perspective because the receiving talent at Cincinnati has not been good. He talks a ton of trash. Dane, this has been fantastic as usual. Again, like I said, an elite mind in the space joined on here on 2-for-1 Drafts. We'll have to get you back on as we get closer to the season or even in season as we see this prospect list change and people go up boards. But thanks again for coming on, man.
Anytime. Thanks, guys.
Dane Brugler, man, is such a stud. I love
mind in space.
He's an elite mind in space. I love how much he dives into the backgrounds. I think he talks about traits in a way that I can get behind. There's some guys that bring up traits first and foremost and covet it as the only thing valuable, but I think how he talks about it and knowing what translates, I think what he says about length at the cornerback position, what he says about ball production as a secondary member is so important. Every time we have him on the podcast, I become more and more impressed.
Yeah, I'll say this about his take on length and basically physical tools. When you take the chances on guys who don't have that, it's easier to look good in college, and especially in the TJ Carter case against guys who aren't going to play in the NFL when you don't have those physical tools. Like it's easier to look good when you're going up against other guys who don't have those physical tools, because once you get to the NFL, everyone has those, and it's going to be much more difficult for you to win because those give you such a leg up. Like it's so much, if you run a 6'3", 7'3" cone like Kwity Paye, it's so much easier for you to rush the passer at the NFL level than a guy like, say, Quincy Roche, who's a much, much better pass rusher right now in terms of what he can do technically and skill-wise. But that only gets you so far at the NFL level, whereas Kwity Paye's job is going to be so easy if he really does have, if he has physical tools like that. So I'm not like I'll take exceptions on guys I truly believe in, who I truly believe have elite play and maybe don't have the physical tools, but you don't make as many mistakes if you truly do say, hey, I'm not going to take my chances on these guys who don't have these cutoffs. And that's why they exist.
All right, let's break into an article you dropped on PFF.com before we jump off the podcast here. The top 10 takeaways from PFF's preseason 2021 NFL draft guide, one of which, if you rate and review the podcast, we're sending 10 people a free draft guide. If you rate and review the podcast with a space between the @ symbol, we'll make sure to get you on that list and send you one. Starting with number 1, box score might not say it, but Justin Fields has far outperformed Dwayne Haskins at Ohio State in nearly the same offense.
Yeah, so I went into this kind of in May is when I started on the preseason draft guide in the 2021 draft class. And we talk about, the class, the upcoming class all the time and rookies. And I really don't watch underclassmen. Like sometimes you'll flash and you'll see them, but I really don't keep track of it. There's only so much space I have in my brain. And as you guys know, if you listen to this podcast, I forget names all the time. Like there's not enough already to go around. So I don't watch a lot of these guys. So I came in pretty much new, not knowing a lot about these guys, not knowing what to expect. And these were the 10 things that really stood out to me over the process of the summer, being like, damn, that's an interesting thing about this upcoming class. And the fact that Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins, same offense, probably has, I don't want to say less receiving talent because obviously Chris Olave is great, Garrett Wilson's great at Ohio State, but Dwayne Haskins had Terry McLaurin and Paris Campbell. Like he had legit receiving talent. And even though Haskins put up a ton more yards, Justin Fields he played a lot better. Like 92.4 passing grade for Fields, 84.9 for Haskins. And when you look at it, Haskins had over 500 more yards on screens last year. They were 2 years ago, in that Ohio State offense than Fields did. 664 yards on screens, only 123 for Fields. He was throwing down the field. He was earning it with his arm. And yes, as we sort of said with Dane, favorable offense for sure. But I think the way Fields executed it was just at a much higher level than the way Haskins did.
Couldn't agree more. Number 2, the 2021 edge class has not produced an elite level yet. The only guy with an above 90 PFF pass rushing grade this past year is Boogie Basham from Wake Forest. Everyone else is a ton of potential. Kwity Paye is the number 1 player on Bruce Feldman's freaks list. We've said that probably 50 times now. Gregory Rousseau looks like he was built in a lab. Jason Owe has flashy plays on tape, but nothing consistent. All of these guys, you're talking about upside, potential, these buzzwords, but we're going to continue to talk about this through and through. I think Gregory Rousseau will eventually lock himself into that edge 1, but edge 2, edge 3, it's going to be tough, especially with Jason Owe not suiting up in the Big Ten. There's so much potential that needs to be talked about and not enough production.
Yeah, the amount of guys who had wow physical traits was crazy to me. Owe, Paye, Rousseau, Josh Cahill from Florida State, even Xavier Thomas from Clemson that just have these plays where you're just like, damn. And Carlos Basham as well. No one besides Basham had a pass rushing grade over 82 though the last year. So it's just in our, the way we approach this and with how much we believe the fact that being able to produce at the college level is very predictive to the NFL, especially along the defensive line where you get a lot of one-on-one interactions, the similar thing to baseball where you're getting a lot of information on a guy. We think it's very predictive. And so we need to see it with these guys. And that's the thing that sucks is we're just not going to see it with a handful of these guys knock on wood that we do. But this edge class, far more potential right now, far more upside in quotation marks than it is actual on-field production.
Number 3, Alabama has 2 likely 2021 first rounders that didn't even start in 2019, and Christian Barmore, who could have a Quinnen Williams-like rise this year playing on the interior for Alabama, and Jalen Waddle, a guy that we waxed poetic with Dane Brugler about, a guy I really like in this class that could be even a better prospect than Henry Ruggs, who went 10th in this past year's draft.
Yeah, you want to know why Alabama is fucking Alabama? It's the fact that they can put guys these are going to be top 15 picks. Like I will bet good money right now that these 2 guys are top 15 picks, and they were not starters last year for Alabama. Jalen Waddle and Christian Barmore. That's fucking like that is absurd that a college program is that loaded at positions like wide receiver and defensive tackle that they can afford to let guys ride the pines. Alabama's ridiculous.
Alabama is ridiculous. Should have just been the takeaway. Every year we're talking about. I mean, Patrick Surtain was the number 3 player on Dane Brugler's board, and him talking about him, it makes me want to go back to tape and see. I mean, he said he could run in the 4.4s. I didn't see that speed on there, but if he can, I thought he was more of a 4.5s type. Like that is the biggest difference between him and Trevon Diggs. If he has legitimate top speed, that is huge. Like that is huge for his projection. Number 4, we've said this a ton, but you got to put the stamp on it now. Penei Sewell, the Oregon offensive tackle, is unlike any tackle prospect we've seen.
Yeah, the 2 biggest, and we've harped on this a lot, but the 2 craziest things to me were, 1, he started last year, the beginning of last year, he was 18 years old when the start of the season. He's still
that is still insane.
He was 18 years old when he had the highest graded season we've ever given to an offensive tackle. And the fact that he's 330 pounds. Those 2, when I found out both those things, it just absolutely blew my mind after watching his tape. Because, well, 1, he's just so utterly dominant, and to do that at 18 years old is crazy. And 2, the way he moves at 330 pounds, the dude is different for sure.
Coming down the list now, number 5, Florida State's Corey Durden has the most pressures of any returning defensive tackle in the country, which is absurd. The first thing right here is who?
I hadn't heard this.
Corey Durden, though, he played a ton, 721 snaps, 45 total pressure, better than his teammate that's getting hyped up as a top 50 player in Marvin Wilson.
Well, Marvin Wilson got hurt also.
Marvin Wilson got hurt, but also I think Durden, motor and cleanup pressure is on his tape a ton. Like this guy's working to the quarterback consistently, doesn't give up on the play. And that honestly leads to a ton of pressures for these guys.
His tape is wild. Like it's crazy to watch. If you haven't watched any of them, he's probably the most, hashtag fun to watch defensive tackle in the country, because it's just either awesome or awful. Alternating. He's the Andre Sisco of defensive tackles. He's just so up and down, and he has the physical tools. He's 6'5", got long arms. He can, if he puts it all together, he has better physical tools than Marvin Wilson does. But man, he needs another season. He might need 2 more seasons. He's a redshirt junior. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't even declare for the draft, because he's just got a lot to clean up. But this is just it's a name to watch going forward.
Number 6, Travis Etienne's 2019 season was downright freaky. To add to that, I'm pretty sure since 2014, no running back has led the country in forced missed tackles per attempt and yards after contact per attempt in the same season. He did that. Yeah. And he averaged over 5 yards after contact this past year. Explosive. Big hit, big play waiting to happen. The number 1 player on PFF's board before he decided to come back to Clemson for whatever reason while playing running back.
What was he doing?
He better not get hurt, dude. I'd be pissed if a Bryce Love situation happened and he gets hurt. And is never end up being the running back he could be in the NFL.
Which, by the way, Bryce Love apparently looks good in camp.
Oh God, I could have predicted that 3 years ago.
Let's go. I mean, he's a monster. But yeah, Etienne, the way he just runs and how explosive he is. I mean, you saw it as a true freshman. I remember seeing one of his runs just be like, who the hell is that? And it was Etienne. And I can't believe he came back to school. Yeah. Like it's the 32nd in rushing attempts and led the nation broken tackles. He's just a monster.
Number 7, Georgia transfer, Jamie Newman, who college analyst here at PFF, Anthony Tresh, loves. Yeah. Was a completely different quarterback without wide receiver Sage Surratt at Wake Forest.
His 4 lowest graded games came at Sage Surratt gets hurt. 4 games after that, all 4 were his 4 lowest graded games of the season. I'm not sure if that that's obviously looks good for Sage Surratt. Like Surratt, he was a monster in contested catches last year, went 18 of 30. So he's going to be opting out. I don't think he had much more to prove other than just like that shoulder was healthy. Is probably why he didn't declare last season, because he averaged over 100 yards a game, at Wake Forest. But Newman, he's got a lot to prove. And he's the guy who, I guess he is on radars, But he's the guy who I'd say, Dane Brugler said, Kyle Trask, I think he could make his way into a top 10, top 15 pick because he's very athletic. He adds that dual threat element to your offense, and he's very accurate down the football field. It's a proven path to success in the NFL. But if he doesn't do it, if he looks like that guy we saw down the stretch when he's at Georgia, or doesn't even win that starting job at Georgia,
if he doesn't win the starting job at Georgia, that'd be insane.
Happen, yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. TCU has one heck of a safety duo. We've talked about our Darius Washington, the pipsqueak that hits really. I think he hits well. It comes downhill well. Lowest missed tackle rate among any safety in the Power 5 this past year.
Yeah.
And then also Trevon Diggs, who's also graded super well at TCU. You obviously love our Darius Washington. Go ahead and say that.
Both made Bruce Feldman's Freaks List.
Both made Bruce Feldman's Freaks List. Both earned 90-plus overall grades this past year. I'm so glad the Big 12 is still playing in the fall because I want to watch these guys play again.
Yeah, I came in and I saw the two that they were 1 and 2, the highest grade safeties. I was like, okay, there's like some schematic thing they did that was like different these guys are both awesome. Like they're both first round safety prospects. They're both that good at the position. There was no schematic element whatsoever. They were running, the same thing Gary Patterson does every year. It's a lot of too high coverages. And they're damn good. And they made Bruce Feldman's Freaks List. They're both very freaky athletes, different sizes. They're on the opposite ends of the size spectrum, with our Darius Washington being tiny, Morrig being your prototypical, size, speed sort of safety. But I think both are just, like I said, both are legit first round prospects, which is, like I said, it was crazy to me going in and watching them.
Number 9, and this is a colder take than you've had previously. It's yet another loaded wide receiver class. It's a better receiving class than this past year. Jamar Chase,
I think it is.
The consensus wide receiver 1 out of LSU. Rondale Moore, Purdue receiver that opted out, but had, like Dane Brugler said, one of the best, if not the best, true freshman season we've ever seen. Devontae Smith of Alabama, Waddle, Bateman, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Olave. The list goes on. And I didn't even bring up Tutu Atwell, Tamorian Terry for Florida State.
Well, now you're bringing him up.
No, now I'm freaking bringing him up. Jeez. Anyway, this receiving class is absurd. I agree with what Dane said in terms of like the battle for wide receiver 2 is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
But like it almost doesn't matter. Like it's pick your poison. There's so much talent. There's so much speed, so much route running ability, athleticism in this class that like I'm in love with the top 6 guys, top 7 guys on this list.
Yeah, there's 11 guys who got top 3 round grades in the draft guide. And every year we see guys who weren't even on radars, like Brandon Ayuk last year, KJ Hamler, Devin Duvernay, come out of nowhere and be top 3 round wide receivers. So that's 11 guys who are already that I think that highly of. And you could even see more as the fall goes on, knock on wood that there's football, but it's loaded.
Number 10, lastly here, and then we'll jump off the pod here, but don't forget about Iowa State's Brock Purdy in this quarterback class.
Yeah. I came in thinking it would be like classic Big 12 offense, like Mason Rudolph graded highly at Oklahoma State, but not a lot of that looked translatable to the NFL. And then watched Brock Purdy's tape, and I'm like, that was like a lot of NFL stuff. And not just a lot of NFL stuff, the way he managed game situations, the way he, was cognizant of down and distance and what he could do outside of the pocket. He's got he doesn't have a ton of NFL tools, but there's a lot to like about his tape to where
he's currently a top 15th
on our draft board. Like I think that highly of him as a quarterback prospect to be doing what he did as a sophomore, true sophomore, and as a true freshman. I think there's something there. And with no NFL talent to speak of outside of a tight end around him, I think it's very impressive. So.
Again, I'm so happy that Big 12 football is still going on in the fall because I want to see more of Brock Purdy. I want to see more of these TCU safeties. I think there's talent in the Big 12. I need to see more tape of. That's going to do it for this episode of 2-for-1 Drafts. Remember to rate and review the podcast and leave your email with a space between the @ symbol to get a chance to win a 2021 NFL Draft Guide that we dropped on PFF.com. Until next time, Austin Gayle, Mike Renner, 2-for-1 Drafts.
You want to get rid of me and get back to more great PFF YouTube content? All you have to do is push that button right there and subscribe. Thanks for watching.